On the surface, the 2015 George Miller film, Mad Max Fury Road, may seem like a typical action-adventure film released that year, except it's much more than that. Despite the titular character taking a backseat in place of the film's debatable real main character, Furiosa, Max is a dynamic character with a transformative arc that builds throughout the film. In this video, I will discuss how the film establishes expectations and subverts them in order to build its characters. This is Mad Max Fury Road. How a boot helped redeem Max Rockatansky. Max begins his journey as a loner. Rather than joining a group to better improve his chances of survival, he chooses to live the life of wandering aimlessly through the desert, fending for himself. In the first 3 minutes, we learn several things about Max. 1. He is adapted to a nomadic lifestyle. Max has a huge beard, a rusty car, a bag for himself, and is eating lizards out in the desert, showing that he has been alone for a very long time, he's constantly moving, and that he doesn't plan on stopping anytime soon. 2. He is haunted by figures from his past. Throughout the movie, Max gets visions of dead loved ones from his past. Whenever they show up, they would torment him with questions and phrases like, "Where were you, Max? You promised to help us, Max. And you let us die." These visions show that he feels guilty for what ended up happening to everybody he ever loved, which is why he ends up all alone. And 3, he solves his problems by running away from them.
I am the one who runs from both the living and the dead.
After Max gets captured by Immortan Joe's war boys, the movie plants the first instance of Chekhov's gun. Max is a universal donor, which I will discuss later. The second instance of Chekhov's gun occurs much later, when Nux's Lancer, Slit, takes off Max's boot during the sandstorm, which again, I will discuss later. The first 30 minutes establishes Max as a loner who is haunted by his past and runs away from his problems. A lot has happened to Max in the first half of the movie, but his journey has only just begun. When Max survives the storm, he wakes up to find himself in the middle of the desert with Nux passed out next to him. After trying and failing to get himself free, he takes Nux's boot and goes out into the desert. Max's arc begins here, when he finds Furiosa and Joe's wives. When he finds them, he tries to fight them off and run away in the war rig, except he's stopped right in his tracks.
Kill switches. I set the sequence myself. This rig goes nowhere without me.
Because of this, the story now forces Max to work with Furiosa, thus starting his arc. As I've stated before, Max is not a team player, only working with Furiosa to escape from Immortan Joe. So as a result, he doesn't get along with Furiosa and the others.
Do you think he's coming to the green place?
Never. He's a crazy smeg who eats schlanger.
The first instance of Furiosa and Max working together to achieve a common goal is when they are fighting off the buzzards. Both are carrying their fair share of driving the rig and shooting anybody that isn't friendly. Max is very well into his arc by helping them achieve their goal, although he is very much still his old self. For example, when Furiosa asks for his name, he doesn't say anything.
What do I call you?
Does it matter?
As he feels that anybody who ever knew him as a person eventually ends up dying in his own hands. Another example is just after Splendid dies. One of the wives orders him to turn the war rig around and retrieve her. Max then gets a flashback to his daughter dying in his arms and refuses. Although he is working as a team with Furiosa and the gang, he still believes that the only way he can solve his problems is by running away from them. Max may have changed a little, but he still is very much his old self, and still has a long way to go. Max's second point in his arc begins here, when the war rig gets stuck in the sand and the bogs. Not only is he carrying his weight, but here is also where he commits his first genuine selfless acts. The first one is when he decides to almost sacrifice himself for the group.
What if you're not back by the time the engines have cooled?
Why you keep moving?
His second selfless act just so happens to be a payoff, when he gives Nux a spare boot after taking his original boot in the beginning of the movie. Max is definitely changing for the better, but here is where his most dynamic change occurs. When he and Furiosa encounter the Volvani, she asks him to come with them, only for him to refuse. The next morning, Furiosa and the Volvani have already gone, leaving Max behind. Max gets another vision of his daughter, except instead of saying, "You let us die," she beckons towards the bikers. Rather Rather than abandoning Furiosa like he did with his loved ones, he decides to go back for them and help them take back the Citadel. This is Max's turning point. Max's final piece to his arc occurs just after Furiosa kills Immortan Joe and Nux sacrifices himself. Furiosa is mortally wounded and is losing blood fast. This is where the final payoff comes in, Max being a universal donor. As he begins the blood transfusion, he finally tells her his name.
Max. My name is Max.
As a result of Max's selfless acts and accepting camaraderie, Furiosa doesn't have to end up dying in Max's arms like his loved ones did in the past, thus changing Max as a character and closing his story arc for good. Like I've stated, Mad Max Fury Road is not a typical summer blockbuster. Instead of having the protagonist go through the motions and learn nothing, like in most mainstream films, Max does a full arc that transforms him into a different character than he started out as, and throughout the movie, this is conveyed through Fury Road's excellent script, George Miller's directing, and Tom Hardy's performance. Little things like that is how the film ended up redeeming the character of Max Rockatansky.